All right. Hey, this is Brent Leary, and yeah, I'm sheltering in place still. I'm still doing the LinkedIn Live here. Just kind of doing what everybody else is doing. But I'm really happy to have with me Marc Andrews, who's from Pegasystems, and we're going to be talking about something that's kind of really near and dear and important to a lot of small businesses right now. That whole PPP paycheck. What is that? Paycheck. What?
Paycheck protection program.
Paycheck protection program, and it's been out, and people have been applying, and it looked like maybe it's run out, but maybe it's going to start to replenish. But Marc is going to talk about what Pegasystems is doing to kind of help banks who've just been crushed with the demand for this thing. Because I mean, let's face it, we're shut down. Small businesses are shut down, and they want to keep their employees, and they want to be able to reopen their businesses when the pandemic kind of passes. So I want to hear what Pega is doing to help with that. But Marc, before we jump into all of that, maybe you can tell people a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I've been working in the banking and technology industry for around 25 years or so, and joined Pega back in October to help drive application of Pega capabilities in banking and insurance.
Okay, so let's get into it. I mean, I think there is almost a deal for a second round of investment for this PPP program, but let's talk about just why the money just flew out before. I don't really know. Did it make a full week before they were announcing it was running out? But maybe you could just give us a little bit of a high-end view of what's going on with the PPP program from your perspective.
I think it was viewed as something, as a potential lifeboat to save a lot of the small businesses that are struggling to stay afloat right now. And obviously, there are a lot of businesses suffering that needed to help when you saw how many applications came in. And this is a somewhat unique program, even unique compared to the programs we're seeing in other countries, whereas the government is offering to not just back the loans, but actually grant forgiveness for the loans completely. I mean, they're almost more of grants rather than loans in reality, as long as they're used for certain purposes and specified purposes. And this is part of what is led to the challenge that banks had. If you remember when the program went live that first Friday, a week and a half or so ago, many of the banks were struggling to even take in applications, accept things. The government had given certain guidelines around where they were trying to put in place recommendations to process these within a 24-hour period, which is just nothing what most banks are equipped to handle for these types of loans. And that's where we saw a lot of the struggle. Many banks were just receiving more applications than they could handle. And it led to them, one, having to pull in a lot of other people across the organization to deal with them. People from other parts of the bank were being pulled in. I have a friend that worked at a regional bank that worked in the commercial banking area, not dealing with small business loans. And last weekend, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, got called in and was asked to basically work on all these loan applications over the period of that weekend. And another thing they were struggling with is there are very specific guidelines around who's eligible for these loans, how much money they can actually, the maximum amount that they can actually borrow and get grants on based on those circumstances. And banks were struggling to figure out what those were. My friend told me that just over the period of the weekend, the policies and rules that they were given to review these changed 3 times just over the course of the weekend as they were trying to figure them out.
Right.
So that's been a big problem. And then when you look at all the applications that came in, the only way that banks were able to deal with this is by putting up kind of dumb web forms, something to just capture this onslaught of applications, and then figure out how to manually deal with them. And what happened is, because they weren't able to put in place intelligence into those front-end applications, people would submit applications that didn't necessarily adhere to the guidelines, and they're not finding that out until a human has to actually go and review the application, see how much they applied for, see if they met the eligibility criteria. So they're spending a lot of their time on that upfront part versus even the reviewing the loan application to determine if it, has the right credit worthiness and if they are willing to actually support the loan and and provide that customer with a loan.
It was this pretty much across the board. Every bank was kind of faced with this and having the same kind of issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's, there's a certain set of banks that were really participating in the program, but there were over 30 banks participating in the program. They're pretty much more the larger to medium-sized banks, but they're all struggling. And as you can imagine, the large banks have significant IT departments and are probably a little bit more prepared for putting in place a new online application or web form to capture this information. The next tier of banks were struggling even more because they don't have the same resources as the top 5 do to deal with something ad hoc like this, and especially at this scale. I mean, it's not only something that's ad hoc, but some of these banks were receiving hundreds of thousands of applications. I don't know that they're any of them are really used to handling that volume of these types of loan applications at one point in time.
Yeah, just curious. Do you know if these kind of new programs, do banks handle these things typically with more manual labor, so to speak, rather than having automated processes in place to handle these new kind of programs?
Well, I think traditionally, these things, when they have peaks and valleys in their loan applications and various different processes where they're supporting, whether it's new applications, customer service requests, things like that. But we're seeing this hit across all parts of the organization, and everyone uses the word unprecedented times, and it really is unprecedented for banks to have to deal with this type of spike in volume. So I don't think yes, they would normally just throw additional people at the process, but this is at a whole new level than they're used to dealing with. And that's part of where we were trying to inject capabilities. And what's interesting is Pega's kind of motto or tagline, even before all of this, was build for change. And we couldn't have, had a more appropriate tagline coming into this. And that's what we're seeing our clients are now doing, is they're leveraging their existing Pega platforms to quickly make modifications to how they handle that intake. There's a great example. While in the US, all the lending is going through the banks, in some other countries, it's the actual government organizations themselves that are managing the applications or doing the lending. And in Germany, the Bavarian state government put in place a program at the beginning of March, started putting in place a program at the beginning of March to make money available for some of these small businesses. And they had a similar issue where they had a very simplistic dumb web form on there, and they were struggling to deal with the quick increase in volume. And within a matter of 5 days, they were able to put in place a new online lending application that automated the process from front to back, did the eligibility, checked the eligibility guidelines, did the maximum loan calculations, and handled even the processing and notification to the institutions for fulfillment of the funds to the small businesses' bank accounts. And they got the system up and running in 5 days. And within the first 2 weeks, they processed over 200,000 applications and doled out 229 million euros to small to medium-sized businesses across the state of Bavaria in Germany. So very successful program to get something up and running quickly. And that was sort of what we modeled our solution around. So what we did is we went and created intelligent forms that automatically calculated the maximum loan amount based on the information the business provides, and then checks the eligibility. And we've basically codified the Small Business Administration loan application form. So they published a PDF of the loan application. We codified those into intelligent forms so that you could basically filter out all of those loan applications. So instead of manually having to review 100,000 loan applications, you could filter out the ones that didn't meet the eligibility guidelines, or as people are putting in the amounts, based on their information, it automatically calculates how much the maximum amount you can loan to them, so that a person doesn't have to deal with that and manage that. That way, the resources, the human resources at the bank, can focus just on reviewing and deciding which loans they want to actually move forward with. And then we're trying to automate some of the activities around the fulfillment. So just like in Germany, the Bavarian government used Pega to automate the actual submission of the funds to the account, to the business's account at the bank. Similarly here, our clients are using Pega to automate the submission of the information to the SBA for the review and approval, so they can then ultimately fulfill the loan through their normal fulfillment and servicing systems.
So you basically created what I think you guys call the crisis small business lending application. Is this kind of what you're describing right here?
Correct. So we introduced, and we just made available last week, a crisis small business lending application. And really, it's something that can sit on top of our customers' existing Pega platforms. We're not charging separately for this particular application. We're making it available to all of our Pega clients so that they can more quickly respond to these needs. And we really did build it out, not as a specific payment protection program lending application, but we built it out as a general purpose crisis-oriented small business lending application, where it's designed to be able to encode and codify those eligibility requirement checks, the calculations, and automate the processing, and even enable banks to distribute route loan applications to different groups of people based on the type of loan it is, things of that nature. And while we recognized that the money was running out quickly, what we did, we did foresee, and we knew that there were discussions already happening around an additional round, which you referenced at the beginning of this, and it's looking more and more like that's going to happen and potentially happen soon. So there will be additional funds made available. So banks are going to have to open back up, the coffers and the interface, their systems for accepting new applications. But on top of that, it is likely there may be additional programs like this over the summer as we start seeing the real impact of the shutdown on small and medium-sized businesses. There's different types of programs in other countries. The UK has the UK Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, which is a somewhat similar thing that more provides government guarantees for up to 80% of the loan versus a full grant based on certain usage. And there are also other parts of the problem that we see banks having to deal with. So one thing is accepting the loan application, but I just spoke to another bank this morning, actually, and what we're finding is banks are scrambling just to receive these and take on these loan applications, but the guidelines in the payment protection program stipulated certain requirements on how the money is used for the small businesses to actually be forgiven the loan and for them to be treated as a grant. And only parts of it may be eligible to be kind of forgiven, if you will. It's, if they've used the money for payroll purposes for a minimum, for the first 8 weeks, and there's certain other things they can use it for, like rent and a few other items. So banks are just figured out how to take in and submit the loan applications, but now most of them are, haven't even tackled the problem yet of how to manage compliance with those guidelines, how to track and monitor whether or not the business actually used the funds for those purposes, and whether or not they will be able to have the SBA pay off part of the loan for them versus having to go back to the actual small business. So part of what we've done is enabled you to not only establish a case for managing that initial loan application, but to also establish cases to manage the compliance with the terms of the particular loan agreement. And again, in other programs like the UK program, there are certain guidelines there that you have to make sure you monitor and are in compliance with to have the 80% guarantee. So similar manners. And that's why it's so important to do this in a automated case-based approach. Again, a lot of people put in these dumb web forms, just put it in quick and dirty, applications to just, or even systems to just monitor and, or to just take in and complete the applications, but they will need to track these over time. And that's part of what we're enabling our clients to do, is really not just take in the application, but monitor the adherence to the terms and ensure that 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks from now, that they're able to get the money from the SBA where it's authorized to forgive those loans.
So this is great because it's not just, kind of focused on the front end, just trying to make sure we are able to take everything in, but also be able to keep track of everything. And I know when it comes to the forgiveness part, people are going to be, they're going to be very happy to get the initial loan, but they want to make sure that they're able to, go the forgiveness route if they can at all possible. So I know there's going to be a crush against the banks for folks saying, hey, are we good with the forgiving part too?
Yeah. And that brings up another great point, is if you don't have a case-based system to manage all these applications that have come in, imagine the increased burden on your call centers and your customer service when all of these businesses 8 weeks from now start calling in to find out what's going on. Even now, we're seeing a lot of businesses are calling in to figure out, okay, what happened with my loan? Did I get it? Am I one of the people that got it? Because they're hearing about how the money ran out. And as the new money comes in. So one of the things that we built into our application is automated customer notification. So as an application comes in, if it meets the eligibility guidelines and goes through those initial steps, the customer is notified it's been accepted and meets the criteria. Once it's actually processed and reviewed and approved, automating the notification to the business if it's been approved or if it's been rejected, or maybe it's been put into a hold status now because they don't have any more funds, but maybe it's still eligible and they're waiting to see if they're going to get new funds. So automating those communications will, keep the banks from getting another round of being inundated in the call center or customer service. And same thing down the line, as you mentioned, it's a great point. 8 weeks from now, when they're calling to say, hey, has this been forgiven? If we can automate that and just send them a notification, hey, your loan met the criteria, it was forgiven, or we need to confirm it's met the criteria here, with a link to go and provide the documentation to prove that the money was used for payroll purposes and or rent, enable them to online submit that information, automate the checks, then send them a notification. You will take a huge burden off of the individuals, the call center staff, the loan officers that you can imagine are going to be fielding a bunch of calls 8 weeks from now.
So are you just rolling this out, or do you already have banks using this application?
So as I mentioned, it started off with some banks leveraging our technology to deliver these capabilities in some other regions. And now we have a few banks that have downloaded our reference application that we made available in our Pega marketplace and are starting to work around with it. We have a lot of banks that are using Pega already to deal with some of these different aspects. And now what we've really been doing is, again, trying to provide an accelerator. We're at this point trying to help our clients, the banks, deal with this onslaught of requests from customers, of the applications, things of that nature. So primarily it's around providing accelerators and tools to help our banking clients address these requirements more quickly.
Do you see a time where it's not just the banks, but I think isn't like PayPal doing something, or like other organizations outside of banks that could potentially have this kind of need to automate these processes as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing a lot of other types of financial services related organizations, or organizations that have a foothold in some financial services from one aspect. What was interesting is, leading up into this period, towards the, over the period of last year, the banks were already starting to be under threat from a lot of these fintechs, from a lot of these larger consumer-oriented digital organizations, the Amazons and Apples, et cetera, that are starting to get into financial services related products, whether it's credit cards or lending or other types of financing. So all of these other types of organizations are looking to play and take a role here. Now, what we're seeing is it's a little bit more focused on the organizations that have small business oriented customers and accounts, which are the PayPals and the Squares and those types of organizations that have those relationships, because it's very hard in this You can't do a 24-hour turnaround on a loan application on a new customer where you don't have any of their information, and there are still certain KYC, know your customer related requirements for onboarding a new customer. So the banks need to be, and other financial institutions need to be careful that they don't start letting other bad actors into the financial system through this as a loophole because they're lending someone some money, a new customer that they don't have the appropriate information on. So that's the other thing that we've been focused on looking at doing is how do we accelerate that KYC process? And there are a lot of banks already using Pega for their onboarding and KYC related due diligence, the regulatory compliance due diligence, internationally FATCA due diligence, things of that nature. But typically these are processes that they're used to taking a longer time. And I think overall, not just in this area, we're seeing this crisis is highlighting a lot of the digital gaps, a lot of the processes that take longer than maybe they should. And while right now most people are just focused on kind of firefighting and plugging the holes, we do think as people start getting, I won't say, we don't know what the new normal is going to be, but once they get back to a more standardized way of operating, they're going to look to how do they support this new way of operating moving forward? How do they really start finally accelerating those digital transformation efforts that they had kind of let slide or not been moving as aggressively on before this all started?
Yeah, I was getting ready to say, it seems like there was a lot of talk about digital transformation over the last several years, but maybe it was more talk and maybe it was more digital transition than it was digital transformation. So do you see this accelerating true digital transformation where it's not just, automating processes that we already knew about, but maybe potentially changing the way things work to take full advantage of what the technology allows?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, interestingly, we had been talking going into this year about how we believed that the banks had been only getting to a certain level in their digital transformation journeys, and they were kind of lacking that incentive to take it further. And if you look at digital transformation within the banking industry, a lot of the banks have talked about and have started to put in place digital capabilities, but typically they've focused on a very specific set of processes like bill pay, like mobile and P2P payment. There's been a set of activities that banks would rightfully say we fully digitally enabled. However, what we're now seeing is the gaps in which set of services they actually have truly digitally enabled is what's getting highlighted in this time. We're seeing that they might have digitized certain processes, but not all of the processes. In addition, they haven't necessarily completed the integration between their front end and back end systems. A lot of times it's slick front ends to capture information from the customer, but it's kind of like ignore the man behind the curtain, like in The Wizard of Oz, where it's a bunch of a hamster wheel in the back that's actually getting things done. And that's what doesn't scale when you truly digitize across the bank, across the different processes, across the customer base. We're seeing a whole set of customers that had not made that digital leap before now being forced to make that digital leap, and the banks seeing what it means to need to service and support those people.
Yeah, it seems like the as you were saying, the transformational aspects were around efficiencies and being able to maybe scale certain processes to make them more efficient and more cost effective. But that's only part of the transformational formula. There's doing what we already do more efficiently, but then what about how we could actually do this? Or how could we not just make it a more efficient customer experience, but how can we make it a more pleasurable customer experience? What can we do to take advantage of these technologies to actually go beyond just making our current processes as efficient and cost effective as possible?
Well, that's a great point that you bring up. And in fact, it's one of the other layers of digital transformation that we believe was sort of lacking in a lot of environments, and that is personalizing the digital experience. A lot of people put in these digital interfaces, and they're fairly common regardless of which customer comes on board. And you might have some high-level segmentation, but it's lacked that personalization to the individual customer, what they need, what's most relevant to them. And we did have a few banks that had started that journey of personalizing their digital experiences, leveraging some of our capabilities. And we have some pretty advanced customer decisioning and one-to-one engagement capabilities. And there's a great example of Commonwealth Bank of Australia that was using these capabilities before the crisis and leading up to it. But once the crisis hit, because of the capabilities they had to, in an agile way, immediately change the types of offers, the types of even just the types of information that were displayed to a customer when they logged on to online banking, when they opened their mobile banking app, when they called into the call center, what the customer service agent would talk about, or even in the IVR. They were able, within a matter of days, able to modify their customer treatment strategies and proactively identify the customers that were in most need and deliver targeted customer servicing offers. So instead of trying to cross-sell them, they focused on how they can help those customers and how they can proactively keep those customers from calling into the call center. So they, within a matter of 5 days, were able to touch and identify over 750,000 customers in need, and went out and directly offered things like mortgage payment holidays or deferral of a payment, reduced interest rates on some of their payments, waiver of certain fees, things of that nature, so that they could proactively outreach to their customers and help them and ensure that what was sent to them wasn't a new savings offer or investment offer when they're struggling to just pay their bills, but to recognize that and send something that's more relevant to them and focuses. And I think that's the other big thing that we're seeing is it's changing the focus, demonstrating empathy to your customers and talking about how you can help them versus trying to sell to them in this particular time.
You hit on one of these reoccurring themes that I've had as I've had these conversations and talking to folks like yourself that are, with companies are trying to respond to a really tragic situation, the empathy part, and about how you want to be viewed as a vendor when the chips were down. You were not just looking at your customer as a transaction. You were looking at them as a full relationship, somebody you really had the empathy for and were trying to, help them get past a very tough situation so that once we are past that, they remember that and they, respond to that, as opposed to being viewed as a vendor who, basically treat them as a transaction that, once the chips were down and you didn't really show them any love, so to speak, the transaction was gone. So you were gone too, as opposed to companies who are looking for ways to help, to help get them through the storm. And then once the storm is passed and things are on a much, better footing, they're going to gravitate to those who helped them and not the ones who just viewed them as a transaction.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the banks are recognizing this, that they have to be like that with their customers, and they need to make sure they're there to help them so that they stay with them through this crisis and beyond, versus just, eliminating customers as part of this. And we view the same way our banking clients, that we want to be there to help them. We're not trying to just monetize the situation. What we want to do is demonstrate how they can get value from the platforms they've already invested in, frankly. I mean, we typically deal with the larger to mid-size financial services institutions. We're in the majority of financial services institutions, in the majority of the top 30 banks in the US, in the majority of the global top 50 banks. And what we're trying to do is help them in this time of need and show them, why they should be happy that they made that investment decision in the past, and that we are going to be here for them to help them now and in the future, and help them put in things that will support the new way of operating in the future, versus just helping them put Band-Aids on top of, the immediate problems.
Hey, Mark, this has been a great conversation. Where can people go to learn more about, the crisis small business lending application you guys put together?
So the great thing is we're highlighting all of our new solutions on Pega.com. We have actually introduced around 18 different solutions across different industries. There are 3 in particular in financial services, another 3 in insurance. But if you go to Pega.com, you'll see the crisis response solutions that Pega has introduced to the marketplace. And on our marketplace, the Crisis Small Business Lending app is available for download today. And we're actually introducing a new one today around customer request triage, crisis-related customer request triage, which will be available by the end of today for download also from our marketplace.
Hey, this has been great. Thanks again for taking the time to share. I mean, this is a lot of great information. I hope whatever the bill gets passed, it gets passed quickly, and maybe having a system like yours on top of some of the other applications will help people get their applications processed quicker and get some money flowing out, because people are definitely in need of it.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for the time. I enjoyed this.
Okay. And stay safe.
Okay. You too. Take care.